In a world where strength determines worth, Ilara's existence is a whisper easily forgotten. Born without a wolf in a kingdom that reveres fangs and claws, she's learned to move through life unseen, unscented, unwanted. Her mother's grave still fresh, her father's eyes clouded by drink and debts. She has become nothing more than a burden to be carried or traded. They say the Alpha King's fortress is built from the bones of his enemies, that his golden eyes can see into the darkest corners of a soul, that his mercy is as rare as a winter rose. They say his beast consumes him more with each blood moon, that madness waits to claim him as it claimed his father. What they don't say is what happens when a king who's losing himself meets a girl who never knew her worth. What they don't understand is how powerfully the broken recognize each other, how desperately they might cling to the pieces that make them whole. Tonight, as silver coins change hands and amber liquid burns down her father's throat, Ilara's fate shifts like the phases of the moon. Sold for less than the price of a decent blade, she will soon learn that sometimes worthlessness can be the most valuable currency of all. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The night air hung heavy with the smell of cheap whiskey and desperation when Ilara heard her father's voice cut through the thin walls of their cabin. "It's a fair trade," he slurred, his words weighted by drink. "She's no good to anyone anyway." Ilara remained still on her straw mattress, heart pounding like a frightened animal. It wasn't the first time her father had tried to trade her away, but he'd never come this close to succeeding. "No wolf, no worth," replied a deep, unfamiliar voice. "The Alpha King doesn't waste his time with broken things." "But she's healthy otherwise," her father persisted. "Obedient too. And look at this bottle. Finest whiskey from the Eastern Territories. Worth at least 30 silver. A harsh laugh cut through the night. 30 silver for that swill? And 50 for your wolfless daughter? You must think me a fool." Ilara wrapped her arms around herself, trying to still the trembling that had overtaken her body. Born to shift her parents but unable to shift herself, she'd been a disappointment from the start. Her mother had died giving birth to her. The pack whispered it was the shame that killed her. Her father had never forgiven Ilara for surviving when her mother hadn't. "Please." Her father's voice had taken on a desperate edge. "The debt collectors come tomorrow. They'll take everything. Including her anyway," the stranger pointed out. Silence fell, and Ilara held her breath, listening to the clinking of glass and the creak of their old wooden chairs. "Fine," the stranger finally said. "The whiskey and the girl for 20 silver. 30, 25, and I'm being generous." Ilara bit down on her fist to stifle a sob. 25 silver pieces. That was her value in this world. Less than a decent hunting knife. Barely more than a bottle of imported whiskey. "Deal," her father said. Heavy footsteps approached her small room, and Ilara quickly wiped away her tears. She'd learned long ago that weakness only invited further cruelty. The door swung open, revealing her father's tall, swaying figure. "Get up," he ordered. "You've been sold." Ilara rose silently, her fingers trembling as she gathered her few belongings into a small cloth sack. A worn dress, a wooden comb her mother had left her, a tattered book she'd taught herself to read with. "Leave those," her father snapped. "They're not yours anymore." She let the items fall from her hands, watching as her last connections to any kind of home scattered across the dirt floor. Her father grabbed her arm, dragging her into the main room where a large man dressed in the black leather uniform of the Alpha King's guard stood waiting. The man's eyes assessed her coldly, as one might examine a piece of livestock. Ilara kept her gaze lowered, knowing that meeting a wolf's eyes could be interpreted as a challenge. "Does she understand what's happening?" the guard asked. "She's wolfless, not stupid," her father replied. The guard grunted, then tossed a small pouch that clinked with coins onto the table. Her father snatched it up immediately, fingers working desperately to count his payment. "The king's tax collectors will still visit tomorrow," the guard said, his voice emotionless. "This barely covers half your debt." Her father's face crumpled. "But you said—" "I said I'd take the girl and the whiskey for 25 silver," the guard interrupted. "I never promised salvation." He turned to Ilara. "Come." As she followed the guard to the door, Ilara couldn't help looking back at her father. For a moment, she thought she saw regret in his eyes, but then he turned away, already pulling the cork from his new bottle of whiskey. Outside, a black wagon waited, its sides emblazoned with the royal crest. a wolf with a crown of thorns. Two massive horses stomped restlessly, their breath forming clouds in the cold night air. "In," the guard ordered, opening the rear door to reveal a small, cage-like compartment. Elara climbed inside, wincing as the guard secured a heavy iron collar around her neck, connecting it with a short chain to the side of the wagon. "Is it true?" she asked, speaking for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Am I going to the Alpha King?" The guard's eyes widened slightly at her audacity. "You're going to the fortress," he answered. "What happens to you there depends on how useful you prove to be." The door slammed shut, leaving Elara in darkness broken only by thin strips of moonlight filtering through the wooden slats. The wagon lurched forward, carrying her away from the only home she'd ever known, toward a fate that terrified her more than the hopelessness she was leaving behind. As they rattled through the sleeping village, Elara caught glimpses of warmly lit windows, families gathered together, lives that would continue undisturbed by her absence. No one would miss the wolfless girl, the human aberration in a world of shifters. The wagon picked up speed as they reached the edge of the village, heading toward the great mountain where the Alpha King's fortress loomed like a shadow against the sky. Rumor said King Ronan had built it from the bones of his enemies, that the stones were sealed with blood instead of mortar, that no one who entered unwillingly ever returned. Elara closed her eyes, feeling the cold metal against her throat, the sway of the wagon beneath her, the reality of her new existence settling over her like a shroud. 25 silver and a bottle of whiskey. That was all she was worth. But as the miles stretched between her and everything she'd known, a strange calm began to replace her fear. Perhaps there was freedom in being valueless. When you were worth nothing, there was nothing left to lose. The wagon climbed higher into the mountains, and Elara watched as the first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and gold. By the time the sun fully rose, she would belong to the Alpha King. What he would do with something as worthless as her, she couldn't imagine. Dawn had broken by the time the wagon reached the fortress gates. Elara, stiff from the long journey, peered through the slats at the massive structure rising before her. Unlike the rumors of bone and blood, the Alpha King's stronghold was built of dark stone that gleamed with an almost blue tint in the morning light. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like the deadly shimmer of a predator's eyes. The guard who'd bought her, who she'd learned was called Torin, pulled open the wagon door and unfastened her chain from the wall. "Move," he ordered, giving her collar a sharp tug. Elara stumbled out on numb legs, blinking in the harsh sunlight. The fortress courtyard bustled with activity, guards training in a ring of packed dirt, servants hurrying with baskets and carts, and everywhere, the powerful presence of shifters in their human forms. Several paused to stare at her, nostrils flaring as they tried to catch her scent, but there was nothing to smell. Another oddity of her condition, born to shifter parents but lacking both wolf and scent. In a world where identity and status were read through smell, her scentlessness made her a ghost. "What is this, Torin?" A tall woman with iron-gray hair approached, her straight posture and fine clothes marking her as someone of importance. "The king didn't authorize any new acquisitions." "Bargain find, Lady Vivian," Torin replied with a slight bow. 25 silver. Figured she could work the kitchens." Lady Vivian circled Elara, eyes sharp with assessment. "Wolfless?" "Yes, my lady." And her former pack?" "Northern Crescent. Her father sold her for whiskey and coin." Elara kept her gaze fixed on the ground, fighting the heat of shame that crawled up her neck. "Follow me," Lady Vivian instructed, turning without waiting to see if Elara obeyed. They entered the fortress through a side door, descending into cooler, dimly lit corridors. Elara tried to memorize the route. Left, right, down a flight of stairs, through a large room filled with barrels, but soon lost track in the maze-like interior. Finally, they arrived at what appeared to be a large kitchen. Heat billowed from massive stone ovens, and at least a dozen people worked at various tasks, chopping, stirring, kneading. "Marta," Lady Vivian called to a plump, middle-aged woman covered in flour. "Another set of hands for you." Marta wiped her brow, leaving a streak of white across her forehead. "Can she cook?" "I can learn," Elara spoke before Lady Vivian could answer, earning a sharp look from the older woman. "She speaks when spoken to," Lady Vivian said. "Promising sign. She's yours. Teach her, use her, keep her out of trouble." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Marta? She doesn't go upstairs." Ever. With that, the lady swept from the room, leaving Alara standing awkwardly in her travel-stained clothes. Marta sighed. Well, come on then. Let's get you cleaned up and put to work. Over the next several hours, Alara was scrubbed, dressed in a plain gray tunic and pants, and shown the basic operations of the kitchen. Despite her exhaustion, she worked hard, eager to prove her usefulness. Marta was stern but fair, correcting mistakes without cruelty. "You're a quick learner," Marta commented, as Alara successfully shaped her 10th loaf of bread. "Never had someone pick it up so fast." "Thank you," Alara replied, allowing herself a small smile. "Don't thank me yet," Marta warned. "Life here isn't easy, especially for someone like you. Keep your head down, do your work, and stay out of the warrior's way." Alara nodded, already understanding the hierarchy. The kitchen staff, like her, were mostly human, either purchased, born into service, or working to pay off debts. The warriors, the king's elite guard, were all powerful shifters, as were most of the nobles who administered the vast territories under the Alpha King's control. "What's he like?" Alara asked as they worked. "The king?" The kitchen fell silent, every head turning toward her. Marta's eyes widened in alarm. "We don't speak of him," she hissed. "Ever." Before Alara could apologize, a bell rang somewhere above them, sending the kitchen into frenzied activity. "Evening meal for the upper levels," Marta explained, thrusting a tray of sliced meat into Alara's hands. "Take this to Donal at the service lift. Quickly now." Alara hurried across the kitchen, careful not to spill the precisely arranged tray. As she handed it to a thin man standing beside a small wooden platform attached to ropes and pulleys, a thunderous crash shook the ceiling above them, followed by the sound of breaking glass and a roar that could never have come from a human throat. Everyone froze, eyes lifted upward. "Is that?" Alara whispered. Donal nodded grimly. "His Majesty is displeased." Another crash, another roar, and then the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, being thrown against a wall. "Will whoever's up there be all right?" Alara asked, unable to hide her concern. Donal gave her a pitying look. "New, aren't you? No, girl. They won't be all right. No one who angers the Wolf King walks away unscathed." The evening continued in tense silence, the kitchen staff working efficiently to prepare and send up trays of food that returned mostly untouched. When the last pot was scrubbed and the fires banked for the night, Marta led Alara to a small room off the kitchen where several pallets lay on the floor. "You'll sleep here with the other kitchen girls," she said. "Be up before dawn. The warriors break their fast early." Exhausted, Alara sank onto her assigned pallet, too tired to even remove her shoes. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, but her dreams were haunted by inhuman roars and the image of a wolf with eyes like burning gold. She woke to a rough shake. "Up!" Marta ordered. "The king's chambers need attending." "But you said I don't go upstairs," Alara protested groggily. "Plans change. Everyone else is needed in the kitchen, and Lady Vivian's orders override mine. Now move." Stumbling with fatigue, Alara followed Marta through a series of corridors and up several flights of stairs. The higher they climbed, the more opulent the surroundings became. Polished wood, rich tapestries, gleaming metal sconces holding bright burning torches. Finally, they reached a set of massive double doors, guarded by 2 imposing warriors. "Kitchen girl to clean the king's chambers," Marta announced. "Lady Vivian's orders." The guards exchanged a look, then one nodded curtly. "He's gone hunting. You have 1 hour." Marta pushed Alara forward. "Clean everything. Touch nothing that doesn't need cleaning. Understand?" Alara nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "Good. I'll be back for you when the hour is up." With that, Marta hurried away, leaving Alara alone before the intimidating doors. One of the guards pushed them open, revealing a spacious antechamber. 1 hour, he repeated. Not a minute more. Heart pounding, Alara stepped inside. The doors closed behind her with an ominous thud. The antechamber was richly appointed but showed signs of neglect. Dust on the surfaces, ashes spilling from the fireplace, goblets and plates with old food scattered about. Through another set of doors, she could see a large bedchamber in even worse condition. She'd been set up. This wasn't routine cleaning. This was punishment detail, probably meant for someone who'd misbehaved. But why assign it to her, the newest arrival? No time to puzzle it out. She had only an hour, and the state of the rooms would take 3 times that to properly address. Grabbing a cloth from the cleaning supplies left by the door, she set to work, starting with the worst of the mess. In the bedchamber, the enormous 4-poster bed was in disarray, the sheets tangled and torn in places. Had the king shifted while sleeping? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. On the floor beside the bed lay a shattered mirror, its silver backing glinting among the glass shards. Carefully, she began gathering the broken pieces, wondering what had caused the king to destroy his own possessions. As she worked, she noticed a leather-bound book half hidden beneath the bed. Curious, she pulled it out, finding it was a journal of some kind, the pages filled with a bold, angular handwriting. She knew she shouldn't look, but a phrase caught her eye. The curse progresses. Soon there will be nothing left of the man. What are you doing? The voice, deep and dangerous, froze Alara in place. Slowly, she raised her head to find herself staring into the most terrifying eyes she'd ever seen. They were amber, almost gold, with vertical pupils like a wolf's, but set in a face that was undeniably, impossibly handsome. The man, no, not a man, the Alpha King himself, stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking any hope of escape. Blood stained his simple black clothing, fresh from the hunt, and his dark hair was windswept, falling across his forehead in a way that would have been boyish on anyone else. On him, with those predator's eyes and the barely contained violence in his stance, it was simply wild. I asked you a question. His voice was deceptively soft, all the more frightening for its restraint. Alara realized she was still holding the journal. I was cleaning, Your Majesty, she stammered, quickly setting the book on a table. Lady Vivian sent me. Did she? The king stepped into the room, moving with the fluid grace of a hunter. And did Lady Vivian instruct you to read my private writings as well? No, Your Majesty. I apologize. I shouldn't have. No, he agreed, closing the distance between them with alarming speed. You shouldn't have. He was so close now that Alara could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the forest and blood on him, could see the flecks of darker gold in his inhuman eyes. You're the new one, he said, surprising her. Torrens Bargain, the wolfless girl from Northern Crescent. She nodded, unable to speak, wondering how he knew, wondering if she was about to die. The king circled her slowly, studying her from every angle. No scent, he murmured almost to himself. How fascinating. His hand shot out suddenly, capturing her chin in a grip that was firm but not painful, forcing her to meet his gaze. Do you know what I do to servants who invade my privacy? Alara swallowed hard. No, Your Majesty. A smile curved his lips, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for a human mouth. Would you like to find out? Before she could answer, the chamber doors burst open, and Lady Vivian rushed in, her usually composed face flushed with alarm. Your Majesty, I had no idea you'd returned. This girl was not supposed to be here. I'll remove her at once and see she's properly punished. The king didn't release Alara, nor did he look away from her face. Did you send her to clean my chambers, Vivian? A pause. No, Your Majesty. Then someone has overstepped their authority. Finally, he dropped his hand from Alara's chin, turning to face the older woman. Find out who. I want them in the judgment hall by sundown. Yes, Your Majesty. Lady Vivian bowed deeply. And the girl? The king's eyes flicked back to Alara, something unreadable in their golden depths. Leave her. She has work to finish. But that will be all, Vivian. The dismissal was clear. With another bow and a look of confusion, Lady Vivian backed out of the room, closing the doors behind her. Alara stood frozen, uncertain what was happening. The Alpha King, the most feared ruler in the 7 territories, had just countermanded his chief of staff to keep a worthless, wolfless kitchen girl in his private chambers. Well, he said, gesturing to the mess around them. You heard me. Finish your work. Shakily, Alara bent to resume gathering the broken mirror pieces. From the corner of her eye, she watched as the king moved to a large chair by the window, dropping into it with casual grace. He picked up her discarded cloth and twirled it in his fingers, watching her with unnerving intensity. What's your name? He asked after several long minutes of silence. Ilara, Your Majesty. Ilara, he repeated, as if tasting the word. Do you know who I am? She paused in her sweeping. You're King Ronan, Alpha of the 7 territories. He smiled again. that predatory flash of teeth. "That's my title. I asked if you knew who I am." Alara didn't understand the distinction, but something told her the question was important. "I don't believe so, Your Majesty." "Good," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's keep it that way." The rest of the hour passed in tense silence, Alara cleaning as best she could while the king watched her every move. When the guards knocked to signal time was up, she nearly wept with relief. "You may go," King Ronan said, rising from his chair. As she hurried toward the door, his voice stopped her. "Alara." She turned, heart racing. "Yes, Your Majesty? You'll return tomorrow. Same time. It wasn't a request." "Yes, Your Majesty," she whispered, and fled. For 3 weeks, Alara lived 2 lives in the Alpha King's fortress. By day, she worked in the kitchens, kneading bread and chopping vegetables alongside the other servants. By evening, she climbed the winding stairs to the king's chambers, where she cleaned while he watched in silence. "He's never kept a servant this long," whispered Lena, one of the kitchen girls, as they scrubbed pots together. "Usually they last a day, maybe 2, before—" She drew a finger across her throat meaningfully. "He doesn't speak much," Alara said, careful not to reveal too much. The less anyone knew about her strange arrangement with the king, the safer she felt. "The Wolf King doesn't need words to kill," Lena replied with a shudder, but he hadn't killed her, nor had he threatened her since that first day. Instead, he'd established an odd routine. He would sit in his chair, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching as she swept and dusted and polished. Occasionally, he would ask her a question, where she had learned to read, what the village of Northern Crescent was like, whether she missed her father. She answered truthfully but briefly, never daring to ask questions of her own, though they burned inside her. Why her? What did he want? And most pressingly, what was the curse he had written about in his journal? Tonight, as she entered his chambers with her cleaning supplies, she found him standing by the window, his powerful frame silhouetted against the setting sun. He wore only a loose pair of black pants, his torso bare, revealing skin mapped with scars both old and new. "You're late," he said without turning. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. There was an accident in the kitchens." "I don't care." He cut her off, finally facing her. "Your time here is mine." Something was different about him tonight. His eyes seemed more gold than usual, the pupils more elongated. His movements as he approached her were almost too fluid, reminding her that beneath the human exterior lurked something much more dangerous. "Are you afraid of me, Alara?" he asked, stopping just before her. She swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Majesty." A smile flickered across his face. "Good. You should be." He began circling her slowly. "Do you know what tonight is?" "No, Your Majesty." "Blood moon." His voice lowered to almost a growl. "The night when wolves feel the pull of their nature most strongly. Even those of us who have mastered control find it challenging." Alara's heart raced. She'd heard stories of blood moons, of the frenzy that overtook even the most disciplined shifters. In Northern Crescent, humans locked themselves indoors on such nights, while the wolves ran free in the forest. "Perhaps you should return to the kitchens," she suggested softly. King Ronan laughed, a harsh sound with little humor. "Concerned for my welfare? Or yours?" "Both, Your Majesty." He stopped circling, genuine surprise flickering across his face. An honest answer. How refreshing. He moved to his chair, gesturing for her to begin her work. "Stay. I find your presence steadying." Steadying. Alara couldn't imagine how her presence affected him at all, but she obeyed, retrieving her cloth to begin dusting the bookshelves. As she worked, she felt his eyes on her, more intense than ever before. "The curse progresses," he said suddenly, making her hand freeze mid-motion. "That's what you read in my journal, isn't it?" Alara turned slowly. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Aren't you curious what it means?" She hesitated. "It's not my place to question. Your place." He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Tell me, Alara, where exactly is your place in this world that has no use for wolfless beings?" The question struck at her deepest insecurities, but something in his tone suggested he genuinely wanted to know. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm still trying to find it." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "As am I." Before she could process this unexpected vulnerability, a knock sounded at the door. King Ronan's face immediately hardened again. "Enter," he called. Lady Vivian stepped into the room, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of the half-dressed king conversing with a servant girl. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty. The delegation from Eastern Vale has arrived early. They await your presence in the Great Hall," Ronan growled, a sound that raised the hair on Alara's arms. "Tell them I'm indisposed." "Your Majesty, I strongly advise—" "Did I ask for your advice, Vivian?" His voice was deadly quiet. Lady Vivian bowed her head. "No, Your Majesty. However, Lord Thorn leads the delegation. He specifically requested your personal greeting." At the mention of Lord Thorn, something dark passed over the king's face. "Thorn," he murmured. Of course it would be him. On a blood moon, no less. He rose abruptly, moving to a wardrobe where he pulled out a formal black tunic embroidered with silver. "Tell Thorn I'll be down shortly, and have guards posted at every entrance to the Great Hall." "Already done, Your Majesty. Double them." Lady Vivian bowed again and departed, leaving Alara alone with the increasingly agitated king. He struggled with the fastenings of his tunic, his hands shaking slightly. Without thinking, Alara stepped forward. "Allow me, Your Majesty." He went still as she approached, watching her with those unnerving eyes as she deftly secured the complicated silver clasps. This close, she could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his skin, could see the tension in the corded muscles of his neck. "There," she said, stepping back once the final clasp was secured. "You should return to the kitchens," he said, his voice strained, "and stay there until morning. Do not leave for any reason. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Majesty." As she gathered her cleaning supplies, he added, "Lock your door tonight, Alara. Not all wolves in this fortress have my restraint." The warning sent a chill through her. "And you, Your Majesty? Will you be safe?" Again, that look of surprise. "Your concern is unexpected." "You've shown me kindness," she replied, then immediately worried she'd overstepped. But Ronan didn't appear angry. "Is that what you think this is? Kindness?" He shook his head. "No, little human. This is selfishness. Your presence soothes the beast inside me, and I am not generous enough to deny myself that comfort." Before she could respond, he swept past her, pausing at the door. "Remember what I said. Lock your door. Trust no one tonight. Not even me should I come calling." With that ominous warning, he was gone, leaving Alara alone in his chambers with more questions than ever. Despite the king's instructions, Alara didn't immediately return to the kitchens. Instead, drawn by a curiosity she couldn't suppress, she moved to the window that overlooked the great courtyard. From this height she could see the Eastern Vale delegation arriving. 10 riders on massive black horses, led by a tall figure in a cloak of deep crimson. As the riders dismounted, the leader threw back his hood, revealing a face that might have been handsome, if not for the cruelty etched into every line. Even from a distance, Alara could sense the power emanating from him. This must be Lord Thorn, the man whose mere mention had disturbed the Alpha King. She watched as King Ronan emerged into the courtyard, his posture rigid as he greeted the delegation. There was no warmth in the exchange, not even the formal cordiality typically shown to visiting nobles. Instead, the two leaders circled each other like predators, maintaining a careful distance. "Quite the show, isn't it?" The voice behind her made Alara whirl around, heart pounding. A young woman stood in the doorway to the king's private study, a room Alara had never entered. She was strikingly beautiful, with pale blonde hair, and eyes of such a light blue they appeared almost silver. "Who are you?" Alara asked, instinctively backing away. "How did you get in here?" The woman smiled, revealing delicate fangs. "I have access to all of Ronan's rooms. The more interesting question is, who are you? The little human pet he's been keeping." "I'm just a servant," Alara said, glancing toward the exit, wondering if she could reach it before this strange woman blocked her path. No ordinary servant spends evenings alone with the Alpha King. The woman drifted closer, sniffing the air around Alara. "Fascinating. No scent at all. You're the wolfless one from Northern Crescent, aren't you? The one he's been hiding from the court." "I'm not hidden. I work in the kitchens." The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, he's clever, hiding you in plain sight while keeping you for himself." She circled Alara, much as the king often did. "I'm Lyra, by the way. Ronan's betrothed." "Betrothed?" The word struck Alara with unexpected force. Of course, the king would have a mate. All alphas did. But he'd never mentioned Lyra, and something about the woman's presence in his chambers felt wrong. He didn't mention you, Alara said, before she could stop herself. Lyra's eyes flashed. No, he wouldn't. Our arrangement is complicated. She picked up a small figurine from a nearby table, examining it carelessly, but soon to be finalized. The blood moon is the perfect time to complete our mating bond. She set the figurine down and fixed Alara with a cold stare. Which makes your presence here quite troubling. What exactly has Ronan been doing with you? Nothing inappropriate, Alara replied truthfully. I clean his chambers. Sometimes we talk. Talk? Lyra's laughter was sharper this time. Ronan doesn't talk. He commands, he threatens, he seduces, but he doesn't talk, especially not to servants. She moved to the window, looking down at the courtyard where Ronan and Lord Thorn were still engaged in their tense exchange. Ah, my father has arrived. Right on schedule. Father? Alara looked more closely at the man in the crimson cloak. Lord Thorn was Lyra's father? The implications of this alliance suddenly became clear. A mating between the Alpha King and the daughter of what appeared to be a powerful rival. You should leave, Lyra said, turning back to Alara, before Ronan returns. He's quite possessive of his toys, and I'd hate for there to be misunderstandings on the night of our bonding. The threat was clear, but Alara stood her ground. The king instructed me to finish my duties here. Lyra's beautiful face contorted with sudden anger. You dare defy me? Do you know what happens to humans who challenge wolves, especially on a blood moon? Before Alara could respond, the chamber doors flew open, and King Ronan strode in, his face thunderous. He took in the scene before him, Alara backed against the wall, Lyra advancing on her with clear menace, and a growl rumbled from his chest. Lyra, he said, the name sounding like a curse. What an unpleasant surprise. Lyra's demeanor changed instantly, her threatening posture melting into something soft and seductive. Ronan, my love, I was just getting acquainted with your little pet. Alara is not a pet. She is under my protection. The king's voice was cold. And you are not welcome in my private chambers. Your private chambers will soon be our private chambers, Lyra replied, running a hand down his arm. Father is most eager to discuss the final arrangements for our mating ceremony. Ronan caught her wrist, removing her hand from his arm with barely concealed disgust. There will be no mating ceremony, Lyra. I made that clear to your father months ago. Lyra's eyes narrowed. The alliance will be negotiated through other means. My decision is final. For a moment, Lyra's lovely face transformed, revealing something feral and vicious beneath. But as quickly as it appeared, the mask of beauty slid back into place. We'll see what father has to say about that. She moved toward the door, pausing to look back at Alara. Enjoy your time with him while it lasts, little human. When I am queen, the first thing I'll do is cleanse this fortress of vermin. With that, she swept from the room, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Ronan closed his eyes briefly, his shoulders sagging as if under an immense weight. When he opened them again, the gold had intensified, almost obliterating the human appearance of his eyes. You should have left when I told you to, he said, his voice rough. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I was watching the delegation arrive, and then Lady Lyra. She is not a lady, he snapped. She is a viper in wolf's clothing. Alara hesitated, then asked the question that burned most urgently. Are you truly betrothed to her? No. The word was emphatic. Her father has been pushing for the match since Lyra came of age, but I have refused. Unfortunately, Lord Thorn is not accustomed to being denied what he wants. She said tonight, the blood moon. Ronan's laugh was bitter. Yes, she would choose tonight, when control is hardest to maintain, when the beast is closest to the surface. He moved to the window, staring out at the moon rising above the mountains. They think they can force my hand, trap me when I'm at my most vulnerable. He turned back to her, his expression grim. Which is why you need to leave now, Alara. Go to the kitchens, lock your door, and stay there until morning. What happens tonight is not for you to witness. Something in his tone, in the tension radiating from him, made Alara hesitate. What is the curse, Your Majesty? The one you wrote about in your journal. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, it's not a curse exactly. More a condition, one that worsens with each passing moon. Can it be cured? There are those who think so. His gaze moved to the courtyard below, where Lord Thorn and his entourage were being escorted into the fortress. They believe a proper mating bond would stabilize my condition, control the shifts. And you don't agree? Ronan's eyes locked with hers. What I believe doesn't matter. The curse progresses regardless. Soon. He shook his head. Go, Alara. Please. The please shocked her more than anything else he'd said. In all their interactions, the king had never asked, only commanded. I'll come back tomorrow, she said, moving toward the door. No. His voice was firm. After tonight, you won't return to these chambers. But this arrangement was a mistake. I've indulged my selfishness long enough. The dismissal stung more than it should have. Alara had known from the beginning that her position was temporary, precarious. Yet in these brief weeks, she'd begun to feel something she hadn't felt since her mother died. A sense of being seen, of mattering to someone. As you wish, Your Majesty, she said, bowing her head to hide the inexplicable hurt in her eyes. Alara, his voice stopped her at the door. It's for your protection. You must understand that. She looked back at him, this powerful, feared king who suddenly seemed almost vulnerable in the deepening shadows of his chambers. I understand, Your Majesty. But as she made her way down the winding stairs toward the kitchens, Alara knew she didn't understand at all. What she did know was that, whatever happened tonight, her strange interlude with the Alpha King was over, and that knowledge left an emptiness inside her that felt strangely like loss. The kitchen was eerily quiet when Alara returned. Most of the staff had already retreated to their quarters, doors locked as per Blood Moon protocol. Only Marta remained, nervously wiping down spotless counters. There you are. The older woman rushed to Alara, gripping her arm. I was about to send a guard after you. Don't you know what night it is? Blood Moon, Alara said quietly. I know. Marta's eyes narrowed. You're different. What happened up there? Alara shook her head, unable to explain the confusing mix of emotions churning inside her. Nothing. The king dismissed me from his service. Dismissed? Marta looked stunned. I'm not hurt, Alara assured her. Just no longer required. Relief flooded Marta's face. Well, praise the moon spirits for that. It was only a matter of time before. She stopped abruptly, glancing nervously at the ceiling. Never mind. Let's get you locked in for the night. She led Alara to the servants' sleeping quarters, checking that the small window was securely shuttered and the heavy wooden bar was in place across the door. Stay here until morning, Marta instructed. No matter what you hear, the blood moon brings out the worst in them. With that ominous warning, she left, and Alara heard the external bolt slide into place, locking her in with 3 other kitchen girls who were already huddled on their pallets, wide-eyed with fear. Is it true? Lena whispered as Alara settled onto her own pallet. They say the king's hosting Lord Thorn tonight, during a blood moon. It's madness, another girl, Tessa, hissed. Everyone knows Thorn wants the throne, and his daughter wants the king. She won't have him, Alara said, before she could stop herself. All 3 girls turned to stare at her. How would you know that? Tessa demanded. Alara bit her lip, realizing her mistake. I overheard something while cleaning. The king refused the match. Lena gasped. He refused a mating with Lyra Thorn. But she's the most powerful she-wolf in the Eastern Territories. And the most beautiful, the 3rd girl, Nell, added. They say men go mad from wanting her. Not the king, Alara insisted, feeling an irrational need to defend Ronan's decision. Tessa snorted. Well, it hardly matters what he wants. On a blood moon with Thorn and his wolves in the fortress, there'll be bloodshed before dawn. Mark my words. The girls fell silent, each lost in her own thoughts as the night deepened around them. Outside, the blood moon climbed higher, bathing the fortress in an eerie crimson light that seeped through the cracks in the shuttered window. Alara tried to sleep, but her mind kept returning to the king's chambers, to the tension in his powerful frame, to the warning in his golden eyes. What was happening up there now? Was he facing Lord Thorn alone? And what of Lyra, with her silver eyes and venomous threats? A distant howl broke the silence, followed by another, then another, until the night air vibrated with the sound of wolves calling to the blood moon. The other girls whimpered, pulling their blankets over their heads as if the thin fabric could protect them. Alara sat up, straining to listen. There was something different about the howls now, a note of aggression, of challenge. And then, cutting through them all, a roar so powerful, it seemed to shake the very foundations of the fortress. The king, without conscious thought, Alara was on her feet, moving to the door. "What are you doing?" Lena hissed, grabbing at her sleeve. "You can't go out there." "Something's wrong," Alara said, pulling away. "I can feel it." "You'll be killed," Tessa warned. "The wolves will tear you apart." But Alara wasn't listening. She pushed against the door, but the external bolt held firm. Frustrated, she turned to the shuttered window. It was small, barely large enough for a child to squeeze through, but Alara had always been slight. "You're insane," Nell whispered as Alara worked the crude latch loose. "Even if you get out, where will you go?" To him, the thought came unbidden, but Alara knew it was true. Something was compelling her toward the king, a pull she couldn't explain or resist. The shutter swung open, letting in a gust of cold night air and the crimson glow of the blood moon. Alara hoisted herself up, wriggling through the narrow opening until she dropped to the ground outside, skinning her palms on the rough stone. The fortress courtyard was deserted, but the air thrummed with tension. Above, in the great hall, she could hear raised voices, the crash of furniture, the unmistakable sounds of conflict. She needed to get closer, to understand what was happening. Remembering the servants' passages Marta had shown her, narrow corridors that allowed staff to move throughout the fortress unseen, Alara slipped back inside through a small side door. She navigated the dark, winding passages by memory, climbing steadily upward toward the heart of the disturbance. Finally, she reached a hidden observation alcove that overlooked the great hall. Pressing her eye to a small gap in the ornate woodwork, she gasped at the scene before her. The hall was in chaos. Tables had been overturned, goblets and platters scattered across the floor. In the center stood King Ronan, his formal tunic torn, his face contorted in a snarl that was more wolf than human. Around him, a circle of guards stood with weapons drawn, facing outward toward Lord Thorn and his men, who had partially shifted, their faces elongated, claws extended, eyes glowing with predatory intent. "You've insulted my house for the last time, Ronan," Lord Thorn growled, his voice distorted by his partial transformation. "My daughter is the only suitable mate for the Alpha King. Reject her again, and it will be seen as an act of war." "I don't want war with the Eastern Vale," Ronan replied, his voice eerily calm despite the rage evident in his posture. "But I will not be forced into a mating. Not by you, not by anyone." Thorn laughed, a chilling sound. "Look at you fighting it even now. The beast clawing to get out. How long before you lose control completely? Before the madness takes you as it took your father." Ronan's guards tensed at this barb, but the king held up a hand, keeping them in place. "My father's condition was different." "Was it?" Thorn circled slowly, his men moving with him, tightening the ring around the king and his guards. "The people whisper, Ronan. They say you disappear for days at a time. That sometimes those who displease you simply vanish. That your shifts are becoming unpredictable, violent. Baseless rumors," one of Ronan's guards, Torin, Alara realized, cut in. "Spread by those who would see our king weakened. Then let him prove his control," Thorn challenged. "Here now, under the blood moon. If he can maintain his human form until dawn, I'll withdraw my objections to his rejection of my daughter." "And if I refuse this childish test?" Ronan asked, though Alara could see the strain it took for him to appear unaffected. Thorn's smile was vicious. "Then my wolves and I will assume you've already lost control, and are a danger to the 7 territories, and we will act accordingly." It was a trap, Alara realized. With the blood moon at its peak, no shifter could maintain perfect control for hours. Not even the Alpha King. Thorn had orchestrated this confrontation precisely because he knew Ronan was vulnerable tonight. As if confirming her thoughts, Ronan's eyes flashed pure gold, and a tremor ran through his powerful frame. "You orchestrated this well, Thorn," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "But you've forgotten one crucial detail." "And what's that?" Ronan's smile was terrible to behold. "This is my fortress, my territory. And here, even at my weakest, I am stronger than you at your best." With that, he let out a roar that shook the very stones of the hall. The sound was primal, a clear declaration of dominance that made even Thorn's wolves step back instinctively, but Thorn himself held his ground. "Impressive display," he sneered. "But we both know the truth. The curse progresses, just as it did with your father. Soon there will be nothing left of the man, only the beast, the curse." Again, That word that had haunted Alara since she'd glimpsed it in the king's journal. What was this condition that plagued Ronan, that had apparently afflicted his father before him? Even beasts have their uses, Ronan replied, and something in his tone sent a chill down Alara's spine. For instance, they can smell treachery. He turned suddenly, looking directly at the wooden panel behind which Alara hid. Can't they, Lyra? The panel beside Alara's observation point swung open, revealing Lyra Thorne, who had clearly been using the servants' passages to position herself behind the king. In her hand gleamed a silver dagger. Now, father, Lyra cried, lunging forward. Everything happened at once. Thorne's wolves attacked. Ronan's guards met them with steel and fang, and Lyra, beautiful and terrible in her fury, drove her silver dagger toward the king's unprotected back. Without thinking, Alara shoved open her own panel and threw herself forward. Behind you! Ronan whirled at her cry, catching Lyra's wrist just before the blade could pierce his flesh. For a moment they struggled, strength against strength, until Lyra twisted with inhuman flexibility, breaking free of his grip only to find herself face to face with Alara. You, she hissed, her lovely features contorting with rage. The little human pet. I should have eliminated you when I had the chance. She lunged again, but this time her target was Alara. The dagger flashed in the torchlight, and Alara felt a searing pain across her arm as she stumbled backward. Blood, her blood, spilled onto the stone floor, its scent filling the air. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Every wolf in the room froze, their attention snapping to Alara, nostrils flaring at the scent of human blood on a blood moon night. No, Ronan growled, moving to stand between her and the others. She is under my protection. But Alara could see the struggle in him, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, the shudder that ran through his frame. The scent of her blood was affecting him too, calling to the beast inside him. Kill them both, Thorne ordered his wolves. The girl first. Make him watch. The wolves advanced, and Ronan's guards formed a protective circle around their king and Alara. But they were outnumbered, and the blood moon had heightened the Eastern Vale wolves' strength and savagery. Run, Ronan whispered to Alara, his voice strained. Get back to the kitchens. I won't leave you, she replied, clutching her bleeding arm. You don't understand. His eyes, now completely inhuman, locked with hers. I can't protect you from them and from myself at the same time. The blood, your blood, it's too much. As if to emphasize his point, another violent shudder racked his body, and Alara saw his fingers beginning to elongate, claws emerging from the tips. The curse, she breathed, finally understanding. You can't control your shifts. Not on the blood moon. His voice was barely recognizable now, more growl than speech, and not with the scent of blood in the air. Please, Alara, go. But it was too late. Thorne's wolves had broken through the guard line, and Lyra, seeing her opportunity, struck again with her silver dagger. This time, her target was Ronan's heart. No! Alara cried, throwing herself between them. The dagger meant for the king plunged into Alara's shoulder. Pain exploded through her, white-hot and blinding. She heard Lyra's cry of frustration, felt herself falling, and then strong arms caught her, lowering her gently to the floor. Alara. Ronan's face swam above her, his features contorted with a mixture of fury and fear. Why would you do that? Why? She tried to answer, but the pain was overwhelming. Darkness edged her vision, and the sounds of battle seemed to recede, becoming distant and muffled. The last thing she saw before consciousness slipped away was Ronan rising to his feet, his body beginning to change, not into a wolf, but into something else entirely, larger, more fearsome, a beast that belonged in nightmares rather than reality. The last thing she heard was his roar, filled with rage and pain, shaking the very foundations of the fortress. And then, darkness. Alara drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of pain, of being moved, of voices arguing urgently around her. Occasionally she would surface enough to open her eyes, catching glimpses of stone corridors, concerned faces, the crimson glow of the blood moon through windows they passed. Silver poisoning, bleeding too much, fetch the healer. Fragments of conversation reached her, but she couldn't hold on to them, couldn't make sense of what was happening. Only one thought remained clear in her fading mind. She had to find Ronan, had to know if he was safe. When she finally woke fully, She was lying in a bed larger and more comfortable than any she'd ever known, in a room lit by the soft glow of dawn. Her shoulder and arm were heavily bandaged, and though pain still radiated from her wounds, it was dulled, manageable. "You're awake." The voice came from beside her, and Alara turned her head to find Lady Vivian sitting in a chair, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled, dark circles under her eyes. "What happened?" Alara asked, her voice hoarse. "The king is alive, thanks to you." Lady Vivian's tone was different, the customary disdain replaced by something like respect. "Though what possessed you to throw yourself in front of a silver blade meant for a shifter, I cannot imagine." Alara tried to sit up, wincing at the pain the movement caused. Lord Thorn, Lyra, fled, along with what remained of their wolves. Lady Vivian's expression darkened. After what they witnessed, they were only too eager to escape. "What they witnessed," Alara repeated, a cold fear settling in her stomach as she remembered the king's transformation, not into a wolf, but into something else, something terrifying. Lady Vivian hesitated, then sighed. "I suppose you've earned the right to know. The king suffers from a rare condition, a mutation in his shifting ability that has been passed down through his bloodline. On blood moons, he doesn't shift into a wolf, but into something older, more primal. The curse," Alara whispered. "You know of it?" Lady Vivian looked surprised, then understanding dawned. "Of course. Your evenings in his chambers. He must have trusted you more than I realized." "He didn't tell me," Alara admitted. "I saw something in his journal, but I didn't understand until last night." Lady Vivian nodded slowly. His father had the same condition. It drove him mad in the end. The shifts became more frequent, less controllable, until there was nothing left of the man. Only the beast remained. "Is that what's happening to Ronan?" The use of the king's given name earned her a sharp look, but Lady Vivian let it pass. "The king fears so, yes, which is why he's been searching for a solution. Some believe a proper mating bond would stabilize his condition. Like Lyra," Alara said bitterly. "Lyra Thorn is a viper," Lady Vivian agreed, echoing the king's earlier description. "She wanted the power of being queen, not the burden of being the Alpha King's true mate. And what would that burden entail?" And Lady Vivian's gaze was penetrating. Standing beside him during his darkest moments, facing the beast without fear, loving the man despite the monster within. She paused. "Much as you did last night." Alara felt heat rise to her cheeks. I was just trying to protect him, by offering your own life in place of his." Lady Vivian's smile was small but genuine, a gesture not unnoticed by those who care for the king's welfare. Before Alara could respond, the door opened, and Ronan himself entered. He was dressed simply in a black tunic and pants, his dark hair damp as if he'd recently bathed. Though he moved with his usual fluid grace, Alara could see the weariness in his eyes, the slight hesitation in his step. Lady Vivian rose immediately, bowing her head. "Your Majesty, the girl is awake." "I can see that, Vivian." His voice was cool, but his eyes never left Alara's face. "Leave us." "Of course, Your Majesty." Lady Vivian moved to the door, pausing only to give Alara a significant look before departing. Alone with the king, Alara suddenly felt vulnerable, aware of her disheveled appearance, the thin nightgown someone had dressed her in, the fact that she was in what appeared to be the royal bedchamber. Ronan approached slowly, as if afraid of startling her. "How do you feel?" "Sore," she admitted, "but alive, which is more than you deserved after such foolishness." His tone was harsh, but Alara could hear the concern beneath it. "What were you thinking, Alara? Throwing yourself in front of a silver blade?" "I wasn't thinking," she said honestly. "I just reacted. You could have died. So could you." Ronan shook his head, a mix of frustration and wonder on his face. "Why would you risk your life for mine? After everything you've seen, everything you now know about what I am." Alara considered her answer carefully. The truth was, she didn't fully understand her own actions. Only that, in that moment, the thought of Ronan being hurt had been unbearable. "Because you showed me kindness when no one else did," she said finally. "Because you saw me when everyone else looked through me." "Is that what you think this is? Kindness?" Ronan moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I kept you near me for selfish reasons, Alara. Your presence, your scentlessness, it calms the beast, makes it easier to maintain control." "Then why did you dismiss me?" she challenged. "Last night, before everything happened. You said I wouldn't return to your chambers. Because I was trying to protect you." His voice rose. Then he visibly reined himself in. "I knew what the blood moon would bring. I knew Thorn was planning something. I couldn't risk you being caught in the middle. Yet here I am anyway," Elara said softly. Ronan's expression softened. "Yes, here you are." His hand moved to hover over her bandaged shoulder, not quite touching. "Silver poisoning is serious for shifters, but for humans it's different. The healer says you'll recover fully. And you? Were you hurt?" A shadow crossed his face. "Not physically, but Thorn and his daughter saw what I become on the blood moon. By now, word will be spreading throughout the territories." "Does it matter?" Elara asked. "You're still the Alpha King." "A king who turns into a monster," Ronan said bitterly. "How long before they decide I'm too dangerous to rule? Before they come with silver chains and cages, as they did for my father?" The pain in his voice made Elara's heart ache. Without thinking, she reached out, placing her hand over his. "You're not a monster, and you're not your father." Ronan looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. "How can you say that after what you witnessed?" "Because I see you," she replied simply. "Not just the king, not just the wolf, not just the beast. All of you." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "And what you see doesn't frighten you?" "I didn't say that," Elara admitted with a small smile. "You terrify me, Ronan, but not because of what you become under the blood moon." "Then why?" "Because of how you make me feel. Like I matter. Like I'm not worthless after all." Ronan's hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. "You have never been worthless, Elara. Not to me." The confession hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was quite ready to voice. "What happens now?" Elara asked. Ronan's gaze was steady, determined. "Now, we prepare. Thorn will return with allies, seeking to depose me. And when he does, I intend to be ready." "We?" Elara repeated, uncertain. "Yes, we." Ronan's hand tightened around hers. "If you choose to stay, the path ahead will not be easy, Elara. The curse will progress. There will be more blood moons, more battles, more danger. You're offering me a choice? The first of many, I hope." He studied her face, as if searching for something. "Your father sold you for a bottle of whiskey, believing you had no value. I'm offering you a place by my side, knowing your true worth." Elara's heart swelled with emotions she couldn't name. "And what is that worth, in your estimation?" Ronan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Beyond measure." The sun had fully risen now, bathing the room in golden light. The blood moon had passed, its influence receding, but the changes it had wrought, in the kingdom, in the king, in Elara herself, would remain. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they would face, one thing was certain. Elara was no longer the worthless, wolfless girl from Northern Crescent. She had found her place in the world, beside a king who saw beyond her flaws to the strength within. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly, completely seen. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.